They kicked me out of my brother's MBA graduation for being poor, telling me my thrift store dress didn't belong at such a prestigious event. But when security approached and said, "Excuse me, board member Williams," the entire auditorium went silent. What they didn't know was that the business school they were celebrating at was funded by my foundation. My name is Elena Williams, and for the past 5 years, my family has treated me like a living reminder of what happens when someone makes the wrong life choices. The whispered conversations at family gatherings always follow the same disappointing script. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Poor Elena, she just can't seem to get her life together after the military. Growing up in Boston, our father Thomas built a prestigious law firm from nothing, while our mother Victoria worked as a senior partner at one of the city's most exclusive investment banks. The Williams family valued intellectual achievement, social status, and professional excellence above all else. My younger brother Christopher embodied these values perfectly. He graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law, earned his MBA from Wharton, and had secured a position at Goldman Sachs before even completing his graduate program. Christopher was everything our parents had envisioned: brilliant, ambitious, and destined for the kind of success that opened doors to Boston's elite social circles. I chose a dramatically different path. After high school, I enlisted in the Marines and spent 6 years serving as a communications officer, including deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, where I managed critical information networks for forward operating bases. I coordinated secure communications for special operations missions, supervised technical teams under combat conditions, and earned multiple commendations for maintaining vital communication links during complex military operations. The work required precision, leadership, and the ability to make split-second decisions that could determine mission success or failure. When I returned to civilian life in 2019, Christopher was already making waves in Boston's financial district. His position at Goldman Sachs led to rapid promotions, substantial bonuses, and invitations to exclusive networking events where he rubbed shoulders with Massachusetts business and political elite. He'd purchased a downtown condo, drove a Mercedes, and attended charity galas that were regularly featured in Boston Magazine's society pages. Meanwhile, I discovered that civilian employers had little appreciation for military communications expertise. Job interviews became exercises in frustration, as hiring managers struggled to understand how managing secure networks for combat operations related to their corporate technology needs. They saw my military background as honorable but irrelevant, lacking the civilian certifications and corporate experience they prioritized. I took whatever work I could find: IT support for small businesses, network administration for a local nonprofit, technical writing projects that barely covered rent on my modest apartment in Cambridge. Each position felt like a significant step down from coordinating communication systems that protected American lives in hostile environments. Family gatherings became increasingly painful showcases of Christopher's achievements. He would regale everyone with stories about major deals he'd structured, high-profile clients he'd advised, and exclusive events he'd attended. When conversations reluctantly shifted to me, Victoria would offer diplomatic explanations. "Elena is still finding her direction in the civilian sector," or "she's exploring different opportunities in technology." The implication was unmistakable: the successful son versus the struggling daughter. Christopher occasionally offered help, suggesting entry-level positions at financial firms where he had connections, administrative roles, basic analyst positions, jobs that required none of the strategic thinking, crisis management, or leadership capabilities I'd developed commanding Marines in combat zones. I declined these offers politely, understanding that accepting would confirm their narrative about my limited civilian potential. The family story crystallized over time. Christopher was the intellectual powerhouse who'd leveraged his education into financial success and social prominence. I was the older sister who'd served her country admirably but couldn't translate military experience into meaningful civilian achievement. They weren't deliberately cruel, just quietly disappointed that my service hadn't prepared me for the sophisticated professional world they inhabited and valued. What none of them understood was that I hadn't abandoned my commitment to serving others. I'd simply learned to serve in ways they couldn't see or comprehend. While they measured success through salary figures and social recognition, I was building something far more substantial than any of them could imagine: The breaking point came at Christopher's engagement party in October 2021. He'd proposed to Madison Prescott, whose family owned one of Boston's oldest investment firms, and the celebration was held at the exclusive harbor club overlooking Boston Harbor. The guest list included Harvard alumni, Goldman Sachs partners, and representatives from several of Massachusetts' most prominent families. I debated attending for weeks. These high society events made me feel like an intruder in my second-hand cocktail dress, nursing a drink while everyone else discussed market trends and vacation homes in the Hamptons. But Victoria had insisted on family unity, and Christopher had specifically requested my presence to celebrate his engagement to quote, Boston royalty, as he'd proudly described Madison. The evening unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Christopher and Madison held court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, accepting congratulations from an endless stream of well-wishers who discussed wedding venues, honeymoon destinations, and the promising merger of two influential Boston families. I positioned myself near the appetizer table, observing the effortless confidence these people displayed when discussing their children's Ivy League educations and summer homes on Martha's Vineyard. That's when I overheard the conversation that shattered my faith in everything I'd believed about family loyalty and unconditional love. Victoria was speaking with Margaret Prescott, Madison's mother, near the marble bar where I was waiting for a refill. They were discussing family backgrounds and the importance of maintaining appropriate social standards in their children's relationships. "Christopher is such an accomplished young man," Margaret said, adjusting her diamond bracelet. "Harvard Law, Wharton MBA, Goldman Sachs, exactly the kind of professional trajectory we value in our family circles." Victoria beamed with maternal pride. "We've always emphasized education and achievement. Christopher has exceeded every expectation we set for him." "And what about his sister?" Margaret asked, glancing around the room. "I believe I met her briefly earlier. She seems different from Christopher." Victoria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Elena is, well, she chose military service after high school. We're proud of her dedication to the country, of course, but the transition to civilian life has been challenging. She struggles with finding employment that matches her, shall we say, limited skill set." My wine glass nearly slipped from my trembling hand as I listened to my mother's assessment of my capabilities. "That's unfortunate," Margaret replied with practiced sympathy. "Military service is admirable, but it rarely prepares young people for the sophisticated demands of professional success. I hope she won't be a burden on Christopher as he builds his career." Victoria's response was swift and definitive. "Oh, absolutely not. We've made it clear that Elena needs to establish her own path, independently. Christopher's future is too important to be complicated by family members who can't contribute meaningfully to his social and professional advancement." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Wise approach." Madison's cousins faced similar challenges with relatives who couldn't maintain appropriate standards. Sometimes family loyalty requires difficult boundaries. I stood frozen behind a decorative column, listening to my mother discuss me like a potential liability to be managed, rather than a daughter who'd served her country with distinction. The conversation wasn't just dismissive, it was calculating, strategic, designed to reassure Madison's family that I wouldn't embarrass them at future social gatherings. I slipped outside to the Harbor Club's terrace, needing fresh air and space to process what I'd discovered. The Boston skyline glittered across the harbor, and I thought about all the Marines I'd served with, who were facing similar struggles with families who couldn't understand or value their sacrifice. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Ms. Williams, this is Dr. Patricia Chen from Boston University's Graduate School of Business. We received your foundation application and would like to schedule a meeting to discuss your proposal." I stared at that message in confusion. I hadn't submitted any foundation applications to universities, and I certainly didn't have the resources to fund educational programs. But something about the timing felt significant, like the universe was offering me an alternative path just when I needed it most. The meeting with Dr. Patricia Chen took place 5 days after Christopher's engagement party. I sat in a modest coffee shop near Boston University, still confused about why a business school administrator wanted to discuss a foundation application I'd never submitted. "Ms. Williams," Dr. Chen said as she approached my table, carrying a thick folder and wearing the focused expression of someone accustomed to making important decisions. Thank you for meeting with me. I'm the Associate Dean for External Relations at BU's Graduate School of Business. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip and the intelligence in her eyes. Dr. Chen, I have to be honest. I'm not sure why you wanted to meet. I haven't submitted any foundation applications to your school. She smiled knowingly as she sat down. Actually, you have. 3 years ago, you submitted a detailed proposal for supporting veteran education initiatives through a foundation called the Silent Service Educational Fund. Does that ring a bell? My memory snapped into focus. During my final year in the Marines, I'd participated in a transition planning workshop where we were encouraged to write hypothetical proposals for programs we'd want to support as civilians. I'd drafted a comprehensive plan for helping veterans access higher education, focusing on business and technology programs that could translate military experience into civilian leadership opportunities. I remember that exercise, I said slowly, but it was just a workshop assignment. I never expected anyone to take it seriously. Dr. Chen opened her folder and spread several documents across the small table. Ms. Williams, your proposal wasn't just taken seriously, it was implemented. The Silent Service Educational Fund has been operating for 2 years, providing scholarships and support services for veteran students pursuing graduate business education. I stared at the documents, recognizing my own writing from 3 years earlier, but seeing financial reports, scholarship recipient profiles, and program outcome statistics I'd never created. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. How is this possible? I don't have the resources to fund educational programs. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. Ms. Williams, the fund has distributed over $4 million in scholarships and support services. The Foundation's board specifically requested this meeting because they want to expand the program significantly, and they need the original visionary to help guide that expansion. She handed me a business card with elegant lettering, Silent Service Educational Fund, Elena Williams, founding board member. There's been some mistake, I insisted. I work in IT support. I can barely afford my own rent, let alone fund scholarship programs for other veterans. Dr. Chen studied me carefully, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. Ms. Williams, are you familiar with the terms of your grandfather's trust fund? The question hit me like a physical blow. My grandfather, Colonel James Williams, had died when I was 16. I remembered the funeral, the military honors, and vague discussions about financial arrangements, but I'd been too young and too focused on my own plans to pay attention to estate details. What trust fund? I asked. Dr. Chen pulled out another set of documents. Colonel Williams established a substantial educational trust specifically for his military descendants. The fund was designed to remain dormant until triggered by specific conditions, completion of honorable military service, and demonstration of commitment to supporting other veterans' education. She showed me financial statements that made my head spin. The trust contained over $12 million, growing through conservative investments for the past decade, while waiting for the triggering conditions to be met. When you submitted that foundation proposal during your transition workshop, it automatically activated the trust provisions. The Silent Service Educational Fund isn't something you applied for, Ms. Williams. It's something you inherited and designed. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process that my casual workshop assignment had somehow transformed into a multi-million-dollar foundation operating in my name. The question now, Dr. Chen continued, is whether you're ready to step into your role as the Foundation's primary decision-maker and public representative. For the first time in years, I understood that my family's assumptions about my limited potential were about to be challenged in ways none of us could have imagined. While I was quietly discovering my unexpected role as head of a multi-million-dollar foundation, Christopher's career continued its meteoric rise through Boston's financial elite. By spring 2022, he'd been promoted to vice president at Goldman Sachs, the youngest person in the firm's Boston office to achieve that distinction. His engagement to Madison Prescott had opened doors to investment opportunities, exclusive social circles, and business partnerships that most professionals could only dream of accessing. Family gatherings became elaborate celebrations of Christopher's expanding influence. At Easter dinner, Thomas proudly displayed articles from the Boston Business Journal featuring Christopher's analysis of emerging market trends. Victoria showed relatives photos from charity galas where Christopher and Madison mingled with Massachusetts senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, and Harvard Business School professors. The dining room table groaned under the weight of Christopher's achievements, investment awards, speaking invitations, and membership confirmations from Boston's most prestigious clubs. During these celebrations, I maintained my familiar position in the background, offering congratulations while deflecting questions about my own professional activities. "Elena's doing consulting work now," Victoria would explain diplomatically to curious relatives, helping organizations with technology and communications projects. The description was technically accurate, but completely missed the scope and impact of what I was actually managing. What my family couldn't see was the extraordinary transformation happening in my daily life. My role with the Silent Service Educational Fund had evolved far beyond simple administration. As the Foundation's primary decision-maker, I was reviewing scholarship applications from veterans across the country, developing partnerships with major universities, and creating support programs that address the unique challenges military personnel faced in civilian education. The Foundation's impact was substantial and growing rapidly. We'd awarded scholarships to over 200 veteran students pursuing graduate degrees in business, technology, and public policy. Our mentorship programs connected veteran students with successful alumni who provided career guidance and networking opportunities. Most importantly, we'd developed innovative bridge programs that helped universities understand and value military experience in their admissions and curriculum decisions. The irony was particularly sharp during Christopher's discussions about his client work and investment strategies. At Mother's Day brunch, he enthusiastically described a major deal he'd structured for a technology startup seeking venture capital funding. "The company has incredible potential," Christopher explained to the gathered family, "but they're struggling to secure the funding they need to scale their veteran hiring initiative. It's frustrating because we know there's demand for these programs, but investors are hesitant about the market viability." I nearly choked on my mimosa. Through the Silent Service Educational Fund, I'd been quietly funding similar veteran employment programs for the past year, working with technology companies to develop hiring practices that recognized military experience as strategic advantage rather than charity initiative. "Maybe the problem isn't market viability," I suggested carefully, "but finding investors who understand the actual value of veteran talent in technology roles." Christopher dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand. "Elena, these are sophisticated investment decisions that require understanding complex market dynamics. Veterans need support, of course, but successful businesses can't make hiring decisions based on social responsibility alone." Victoria nodded approvingly at Christopher's business acumen, while I sat there knowing that the Foundation under my leadership had already proven the profitability of veteran-focused investment strategies. That afternoon, Dr. Chen texted me about a new opportunity. "Elena, Boston University wants to establish the Williams Center for Veteran Business Leadership. They're offering to name the entire program after your foundation's contributions. Are you ready to go public with your work?" I stared at that message, realizing that my family's assumptions about my limited capabilities were about to be challenged in the most visible way possible. By summer 2022, my role with the Silent Service Educational Fund had expanded far beyond what I'd ever imagined possible during that transition workshop. The Foundation's success had attracted attention from other veteran-focused organizations, creating a network of partnerships that spanned the entire East Coast. The decision to establish the Williams Center for Veteran Business Leadership at Boston University was just the beginning. Dr. Chen introduced me to Dr. Michael Torres from Harvard Kennedy School, who was developing policy research on veteran employment outcomes. Through him, I connected with Professor Sarah Martinez at MIT Sloan, who was studying the correlation between military leadership experience and startup success rates. What started as isolated foundation work evolved into a comprehensive ecosystem of veteran support initiatives. The Silent Service Educational Fund became the anchor organization for a coalition that included scholarship programs, research projects, and policy advocacy efforts spanning multiple universities and think tanks. My weekly schedule transformed completely. Mondays were reserved for scholarship review committees, where I evaluated applications from veterans seeking advanced degrees in business, technology, and public policy. Tuesdays involved strategic planning meetings with university administrators who were developing veteran-friendly admission policies and academic support services. Wednesdays were dedicated to mentorship program coordination, connecting veteran students with successful alumni who provided career guidance and networking opportunities. The most rewarding work happened on Thursdays, when I conducted site visits to companies that had implemented veteran hiring initiatives supported by our foundation grants. I witnessed former Marines leading cybersecurity teams, Army logistics officers revolutionizing supply chain management, and Navy communications specialists developing innovative technology solutions for civilian applications. But the real breakthrough came when I started receiving invitations to serve on corporate boards and advisory committees. The executives who'd worked with our foundation programs recognized that my insights into veteran talent weren't just charitable observations, they were strategic intelligence about untapped leadership capabilities that could provide competitive advantages. Within 6 months, I was serving on the boards of 3 Boston-area companies, advising 2 federal agencies on veteran employment policy, and consulting with venture capital firms about investment opportunities in veteran-owned businesses. The compensation from these positions exceeded Christopher's Goldman Sachs salary, but more importantly, I was influencing decisions that affected thousands of veterans nationwide. The irony was perfect. While Christopher struggled to understand why his veteran-related investment deals weren't attracting sufficient funding, I was quietly directing millions of dollars toward the exact programs he was trying to support through traditional financial channels. At family gatherings, I continued maintaining my low profile, describing my work vaguely as, quote, consulting on veteran programs, while my family assumed I was earning modest fees for basic administrative support. Victoria would offer gentle encouragement about, quote, finding more stable employment, while Thomas suggested I consider pursuing additional education to improve my career prospects. What they didn't realize was that I was increasingly being recognized as one of the most influential voices in veteran employment policy. Government officials sought my input on legislative proposals. University presidents requested my guidance on program development. Fortune 500 CEOs asked for my assessment of their veteran recruitment strategies. The most significant recognition came in August, when the Department of Veterans Affairs invited me to join their National Advisory Committee on Veteran Education. The appointment required Senate confirmation and would make me one of the primary architects of federal policy affecting veteran access to higher education. I accepted the position immediately, knowing that my family would soon discover that their struggling daughter had become one of the most powerful advocates for veteran interests in the entire country. The foundation work I'd stumbled into accidentally was about to become a very public demonstration of capabilities they'd never recognized or valued. The moment that made everything devastatingly personal happened at Christopher and Madison's wedding reception in September 2022. The celebration was held at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, with 400 guests representing Boston's most prominent families, business leaders, and political figures. The reception was exactly what I'd expected: orchestrated elegance designed to showcase the merger of 2 influential dynasties. I'd debated attending for weeks, knowing these events highlighted everything I supposedly lacked in terms of social status and professional achievement. But Victoria had insisted on family unity for such an important milestone, and Christopher had specifically requested my presence, quote, to represent the family's military heritage, as he'd diplomatically phrased it. The evening proceeded predictably. Christopher and Madison held court at the head table, accepting congratulations from an endless parade of Harvard classmates, Goldman Sachs colleagues, and Boston society fixtures. I positioned myself at a corner table with distant relatives, watching the celebration while avoiding conversations about career prospects and future plans. That's when I overheard the exchange that shattered any remaining illusions about family loyalty. Victoria was speaking with several of Madison's relatives near the open bar, discussing family backgrounds and the importance of maintaining appropriate social standards within their expanded family circle. The conversation had clearly been ongoing for some time, and the champagne had loosened their usual diplomatic restraint. Elena's military service was admirable, of course, Victoria was saying to Mrs. Prescott, Madison's aunt, but the transition to civilian life has been quite challenging. She struggled to find employment that matches her, shall we say, realistic capabilities. Mrs. Prescott nodded sympathetically. Military service often creates unrealistic expectations about civilian career potential. It's difficult when family members can't adapt to more modest circumstances. Exactly, Victoria continued, her voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who'd had this conversation multiple times. We've tried to help Elena understand that her background limits her to certain types of positions. She has some consulting work with veteran programs, but nothing that would allow her to support herself independently long-term. Thomas joined the conversation, swirling his whiskey thoughtfully. The real concern is that Elena sometimes seems to think her military experience qualifies her for leadership roles she's simply not prepared for. She makes suggestions about business strategies and policy decisions that demonstrate how little she understands about complex professional environments. Mrs. Prescott's sister, whom I didn't recognize, leaned in conspiratorially. Is there any concern that her limitations might affect Christopher's social or professional standing? These connections matter so much in Boston's business community. Victoria's response was swift and definitive. Oh, absolutely not. We've made it clear that Elena's career struggles are separate from Christopher's trajectory. She understands that her role in family gatherings is to be supportive, but not to position herself as having expertise she clearly lacks. The conversation continued, but my ears were ringing. I was listening to my parents systematically diminish my capabilities and contributions to reassure Madison's family that I wouldn't embarrass them in future social situations. They weren't just dismissing my achievements. They were actively coaching others to view me as someone whose opinions and insights should be ignored. I slipped outside to the hotel's courtyard, needing air and space to process this betrayal. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. Elena, the White House just confirmed. You've been selected for the Presidential Advisory Commission on Veteran Employment. The announcement will be made next week during the President's speech at Boston University. I stared at that message, understanding that my family's careful management of my limitations was about to be exposed in the most public way possible. The daughter they'd written off as professionally incompetent was about to be recognized by the President of the United States. Christopher's MBA graduation ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday morning in May 2023 at Boston University's Agganis Arena. The event was a culmination of his academic achievements and a celebration that would officially launch him into the upper echelons of Boston's business community with his Wharton MBA and Goldman Sachs partnership track position. I almost didn't attend. The months following his wedding had been filled with family gatherings where my parents continued their careful management of expectations about my capabilities. But Christopher had specifically invited me, saying that my presence would mean everything to him as he achieved this milestone. I arrived at the arena wearing a simple black dress from a thrift shop in Cambridge and the same worn flats I'd owned for 3 years. My appearance was exactly what my family had come to expect, understated to the point of invisibility, appropriate for someone whose role was to applaud others' achievements rather than attract attention to herself. The graduation ceremony was impressive, with over 800 MBA candidates and their families filling the arena. Christopher sat in the front section reserved for magna cum laude graduates, while I found a seat in the general admission area, several rows behind the families of honor students. As the ceremony progressed through the usual academic rituals, I noticed increased security activity near the stage area. University officials were conferring with serious-looking individuals wearing earpieces, and additional personnel had positioned themselves throughout the arena. Something significant was clearly planned beyond the standard graduation proceedings. That's when President Helen Morrison took the stage for what had been announced as remarks about higher education policy. But her speech quickly shifted to a topic that made my heart race: veteran employment initiatives and the remarkable success of programs that were transforming how America supported military personnel transitioning to civilian careers. Today, President Morrison announced, "I want to recognize extraordinary leadership in veteran advocacy. The Silent Service Educational Fund has become a model for the entire nation, demonstrating how strategic investment in veteran education creates measurable economic and social benefits." The arena's attention focused completely on the president's words as she continued. The fund's innovative programs have supported over 500 veteran students, created lasting partnerships between military personnel and academic institutions, and influenced federal policy that will benefit thousands of veterans for decades to come. I sat frozen in my seat, watching my family's confused expressions as they tried to understand why the president was discussing veteran programs at Christopher's graduation ceremony. But more importantly, President Morrison continued, this work represents the kind of visionary leadership that our country needs from its veterans. Today I'm honored to announce the appointment of Elena Williams to the Presidential Advisory Commission on Veteran Employment, recognizing her extraordinary contributions to veteran education and economic integration. The arena erupted in applause, but I could only hear the blood pounding in my ears as a spotlight found me in the crowd. Security personnel were moving in my direction, not to remove me, but to escort me toward the stage. Victoria's face had gone completely white. Thomas looked like he was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Christopher sat motionless, staring at me as if I'd transformed into someone completely unrecognizable. As I stood to follow the security escort, I heard the lead officer speak into his radio. Package is secure. Board member Williams is moving to the platform. The daughter they'd dismissed as professionally limited was being escorted to meet the President of the United States at her brother's graduation ceremony. The applause continued as I walked down the aisle, but all I could see were my family's shocked faces, realizing that everything they'd believed about my capabilities had been completely wrong. The silence that followed my escort to the stage lasted exactly 9 seconds. I counted them while watching 800 people try to process what they'd just witnessed. Then chaos erupted in carefully controlled waves of shocked whispers and frantic phone activity as the audience tried to understand how the struggling sister had just been summoned to meet the president. President Morrison greeted me warmly on the platform, shaking my hand while photographers captured the moment for what would become front-page news across New England. Ms. Williams, it's an honor to finally meet the architect of such transformative veteran programs. Your work has influenced policy discussions at the highest levels of government. I managed to respond professionally despite the surreal circumstances. Thank you, Madam President. The Foundation's success reflects the incredible potential of veteran talent when provided with appropriate support and opportunities. As we spoke briefly about the Advisory Commission appointment, I could see my family in the audience, their expressions cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something approaching panic. Victoria kept glancing around the arena, as if trying to determine whether other people were making connections between the honored foundation leader and their unemployed daughter. After President Morrison concluded her remarks and the graduation ceremony resumed, I was escorted to a private reception area where university officials, foundation board members, and federal policy advisors were gathering. Dr. Chen approached me with a mixture of pride and amusement. Elena, I probably should have warned you that today's announcement would be quite public. The president specifically requested that your appointment be revealed at this ceremony because Boston University has been such a crucial partner in the foundation's success. Through the reception area's windows, I could see my family in heated discussion near the arena's exit. Thomas was gesturing emphatically while Victoria spoke rapidly on her phone. Christopher stood motionless, still wearing his graduation cap, but looking like someone had fundamentally altered his understanding of reality. The confrontation came 20 minutes later when my family finally located the reception area. A university official initially tried to restrict their access, but I intervened, knowing this conversation was inevitable. Victoria spoke first, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Elena, what is happening here? How are you involved in presidential appointments and foundation leadership? This doesn't make any sense. I looked at my parents, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in years. It makes perfect sense, Mom. You just never bothered to understand what I was actually doing with my life. Thomas stepped forward, his lawyer's training helping him focus on practical details. Elena, are you telling us that you've been operating a multi-million-dollar foundation while we thought you were struggling with basic employment? I'm telling you that your assumptions about my capabilities were wrong, I replied calmly. The Silent Service Educational Fund has distributed over $8 million in veteran support programs. I serve on 3 corporate boards, advise 2 federal agencies, and now I'll be helping shape national veteran employment policy. Christopher finally found his voice, though it emerged as barely a whisper. But you never said anything. You let us think you were, that you couldn't. I let you think what you wanted to think, I interrupted. Every time I tried to discuss my work, you dismissed it as consulting with veteran programs, or minor administrative projects. You were so convinced that military experience was a liability that you couldn't see it had become my greatest asset. Victoria's composure cracked completely. But why didn't you correct us? Why didn't you tell us about your success? I looked at the woman who'd spent years explaining my limitations to other people, managing expectations about my potential, and coaching relatives to view my opinions as uninformed. Because you needed to learn that your assumptions about veteran capabilities were fundamentally wrong, not just about me, but about thousands of military personnel you've probably dismissed without ever understanding their actual potential. The daughter they'd written off as professionally incompetent had just been recognized by the president, and they were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their misjudgment. 2 months after Christopher's graduation ceremony, Victoria called me for the first time since that shocking Saturday morning. Her voice carried none of the authoritative confidence I'd grown accustomed to hearing throughout my childhood. Instead, she sounded uncertain, almost fragile. "Elena, could we have lunch, just the two of us? I need to understand some things that I clearly missed." We met at a quiet restaurant in Cambridge, neutral territory where neither of us had professional or family associations. When I arrived, Victoria was already seated in a corner booth, studying a newspaper article about my recent appointment to the Advisory Commission. She looked smaller somehow, as if the revelation had physically diminished her presence. "I've been reading everything I can find about your work," she said as I sat down across from her. "The Foundation's impact reports, the university partnerships, the policy recommendations. Elena, what you've accomplished isn't just impressive, it's extraordinary." She paused, struggling with emotions I'd rarely seen her display publicly. "I spent 3 years telling people that you were struggling to find your place in the civilian world. I explained your limitations to relatives, to Madison's family, to anyone who asked about your career prospects. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. While Victoria had been managing expectations about my potential, I'd been quietly influencing federal policy that would affect millions of veterans nationwide. I researched the Silent Service Educational Fund's board composition after the graduation ceremony," Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena, you're not just a member. You're the primary decision-maker for an organization that has more influence on veteran education policy than most federal agencies." Over the following weeks, something fundamental shifted in our family dynamics. The Sunday dinners that had once showcased Christopher's achievements became genuine conversations about our respective work challenges and contributions to society. Thomas began asking detailed questions about veteran employment barriers and policy solutions, genuinely curious about issues he'd never considered relevant to his legal practice. Christopher's transformation was the most dramatic. The humbling experience of discovering that his struggling sister was actually one of the most influential advocates in her field led him to completely reconsider his understanding of professional success and social value. "I spent years thinking that Goldman Sachs represented the pinnacle of achievement," he told me during one of our newly regular coffee meetings. "But Elena, you've created something that will impact thousands of lives for decades. That's not just success, that's legacy." The broader recognition extended far beyond family acknowledgement. My appointment to the Presidential Advisory Commission had generated media coverage that positioned me as a leading voice on veteran employment issues. I was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum, testified before congressional committees, and consulted with international organizations developing veteran support programs. Most meaningfully, I began receiving letters from veterans who'd benefited from foundation programs or had been inspired by seeing military experience valued in leadership contexts. Each message reminded me that the work wasn't about personal vindication. It was about changing systemic assumptions that limited opportunities for millions of former service members. The Foundation's success had also opened doors for other veteran-led initiatives. Companies that had partnered with our programs were developing their own veteran recruitment strategies, recognizing that military experience provided competitive advantages rather than charitable obligations. Victoria's journey was perhaps the most significant transformation. She left her investment banking position to join a nonprofit organization focused on supporting military families, applying her financial expertise to maximize the impact of veteran support programs. "I spent 40 years in finance," she told me, "but I've never felt more purposeful than I do now, working to support the families of people who've served our country." The daughter she'd once described as professionally limited had become the catalyst for her own career transformation toward meaningful service. Today, I sit in my office at the Williams Center for Veteran Business Leadership at Boston University, overlooking the Charles River and leading one of the nation's most influential veteran advocacy organizations. The nameplate on my desk reads Elena Williams, Executive Director, but the framed photo beside it shows something more meaningful: a group of veteran entrepreneurs who've launched successful companies through our programs. The Silent Service Educational Fund has grown beyond my initial projections. We now operate in 47 states, have awarded over $15 million in scholarships and support services, and have influenced federal legislation that fundamentally changed how government agencies approach veteran hiring and education benefits. The Foundation's success metrics aren't just impressive numbers. They represent transformed lives and career trajectories that wouldn't have been possible under previous systems. The Presidential Advisory Commission appointment led to even broader influence. My policy recommendations have shaped 3 major pieces of legislation: influenced Department of Defense transition programs, and established new standards for how corporations demonstrate authentic commitment to veteran employment. The work isn't about personal recognition. It's about creating systemic changes that will benefit veterans for generations. Christopher's transformation has been equally remarkable. His experience at Goldman Sachs evolved into specializing in impact investing, particularly funding veteran-owned businesses and social enterprises. He's become one of Boston's leading advocates for investment strategies that generate both financial returns and meaningful social outcomes. I used to think success meant maximizing profit margins, he told me recently while reviewing applications for our latest venture capital fund. Now I understand that real success means maximizing human potential. The veterans we've supported have created more innovation and value than any traditional investment portfolio I ever managed. Our family dinners have transformed into strategic planning sessions where Christopher and I collaborate on initiatives that leverage both financial expertise and policy influence. Victoria contributes insights from her nonprofit work, actively promoting veteran-owned businesses and military-friendly employment practices throughout Boston's business community. The broader impact extends far beyond our family or region. The operational frameworks I developed have been adopted by universities nationwide, influenced international veteran support programs, and demonstrated that military experience provides essential leadership capabilities for addressing complex societal challenges. Last week, I received a letter from a marine logistics officer who used our scholarship program to earn her MBA and subsequently launched a supply chain management company that now employs over 200 people. Her success story isn't unique. Our foundation has supported the creation of veteran-owned businesses that collectively employ thousands of Americans and generate hundreds of millions in economic activity. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy is the cultural shift we've helped create around veteran employment. Companies that once viewed military hiring as charitable obligation now compete to recruit veteran talent, understanding that military experience provides strategic advantages in leadership, crisis management, and operational excellence. The mentorship network we've built connects veteran students with successful alumni across every industry, creating pathways for military personnel to transition into leadership roles where their expertise creates genuine value, rather than filling diversity quotas. My story isn't really about family vindication or personal triumph over assumptions. It's about proving that military service provides extraordinary preparation for civilian leadership, but only when society recognizes and leverages that preparation effectively, rather than treating it as a limitation to overcome. The sister they kicked out for being poor had actually been funding the very institution where they celebrated success. Sometimes the most powerful way to change perceptions isn't through arguments or explanations, but through results that speak louder than any words. The veteran they thought was struggling had been building the future they couldn't imagine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.